Hello. In today's section, we're going to talk about IELTS Part 2. Of course, if you remember, we talked about IELTS Part 1 and we said what kind of topics and what things you should need to do and things you should try to avoid. In today's session, we're going to talk about IELTS Section 2, which is Part 2. You might ask the question, why do I need to know about IELTS? The answer is because your oral exam is just very similar to IELTS. So when you learn about IELTS, actually you are learning about your oral exam at the end of the semester. So it's very, it's going to be very useful to practice and to learn the most important things in this part or in this section. So in this section, let's see what we're going to talk about today. So this is an overview. We're going to cover three main points. Number one, we're going to look at what happens in this section. And then we're going to look at things you should do and things you should not do. So things you should avoid. Now, let's start with some general details about this section. This section is going to last up to 4 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes. You're going to look in this section at the questions and then you're going to speak for 1 or 2 minutes continuously. It means the examiner is not going to interrupt you. The examiner is not going to ask you the questions. You have to speak alone. So the examiner will not ask you the questions. You need to speak for 2 minutes in a presentation form. And a presentation form is in, as you can see, is in the red because it's very important when you get the questions that you don't read the question and then you answer it. Don't do that. Again, it's called mini presentation section. So you have to read the question in your eyes and you have to keep speaking for like up to 2 minutes or 3 minutes continuously. Okay, so you have to be careful about this kind of or this section. Okay, so now this is an example of question. Describe a museum that you have visited. You should say where it is, why you went there, and what you particularly remember. So once you receive this question, so you have up to 1 to 2 minutes to think about the answers. What happens at the beginning is that the examiner is going to give you a piece of paper and a pencil to think. You can write as much as you like, the ideas you want to write about this card or these questions. The examiner is going to give you again the paper, the pencil, and this, for example of questions. You're going to look at the questions. You're going to write whatever you want to write. You have 1 to 2 minutes. And then you're going to start speaking. The examiner is not going to ask you where it is, why you went there, what you particularly remember. No, the examiner is not going to do that. You have to look at the questions while you are speaking and you have to answer. At the same time, remember, don't try to answer each question in this way. Where it is? Teacher, it's in Muscat. Why you went there? I went there because I went with my family and it was a good day. What you particularly remember? I remember. You can't say it in this way. What you need to speak again, I'm confirming this point. You have to speak in a presentation form. This section of the exam is called mini presentation. So you have to speak in a presentation form continuously. These questions just the prompts. You need to cover them, but if you cover more than them, it's acceptable. Okay, and we're going to talk about this more in details when we're going to talk about things you need to do, and things you need to avoid. So this is generally what the exam or what the section 2 is about. And then we have other examples, could be describe a precious item you own, special day, and then you have, of course, many questions under that. For example, special day, who was that day with, or who did you spend it with, like what was the occasion, etc. So you've got some other questions you need to cover. Sport event or concert you went to. You need to describe, for example, your favorite teacher. You need to describe a book, music, an item of clothing, or historical building. Most importantly is usually, this section, usually, not always, usually it is describe something followed by why, when, like who, etc. Okay? This is usually what the section 2 is about. So it's highly recommended that you go and learn the adjectives to describe people and adjective to describe items. So for example, you can, if you just want to improve your adjective vocabulary, you can just go to Google and write, for example, adjectives to describe people, and you'll have a list of adjectives. You can just learn them. Adjective to describe items, and you could have a list of adjectives. You can use them in the exam. That's very simple. Just use Google, and it doesn't need a really hard work. Then we have now a list of do's. Do's, it means that the things that you need to do in this section particularly. Let's move. Take notes. Why? And keywords. Take notes, it means that you need, some students in the exam, I don't know why, I give them the paper and I give them 1 to 2 minutes to think and write, and then they finish the time. Yes, teacher, I'm ready. And after the exam, when I take the paper, I look at the paper, they've written nothing. Well, you've got 1 to 2 minutes. Use them wisely and write. Do write. Why do we need to write? Take notes. Why? Because when you're writing your idea, that will help you when you are speaking to focus on your language more. Maybe you will be more relaxed. You'll be able to organize your ideas more. So you have a lot of options, or you've got a lot of things you have to do while you are in the exam. So taking notes definitely will help you going smoother in your process. Keywords, it means try not to write full sentences, just write the keywords, just write the things that reminds you with the main ideas, because only you have 1 to 2 minutes. You don't have enough time. You cannot write full sentences. You cannot write a paragraph. It's not a half an hour. It's just 1 to 2 minutes to get just kind of brainstorming. And then cover every point of the questions. As I showed you, for example, we have like the example of a museum. We have 3 questions, maybe sometimes 4 questions. What you need to do, you need to make sure that you cover all the questions and don't ignore any point. And number 3, point to point as you talk. Using finger, do not say the question. Okay, so let's move it to this. Point to point as you talk. Usually the questions in the exam are ordered. In, like, for example, if we're talking about the museum, the example that I gave you. So we're going to ask you the first question, why did you go there, for example? And then, who did you go with? And then the last question, what did you particularly remember? I'm not going to say what do you particularly remember the first question. So even the questions are going to be in a logical order. So if you follow the order of the questions, most probably the order of your speech will be ordered as well. You can use your finger. This is a general tip. If when you're speaking, for example, you can just use your finger while you're talking to point on the question and to make sure that you cover all the questions. And remember, don't say the question because, as I told you a minute ago, it's just a mini presentation. You have to present your ideas without saying the questions. You can just keep your eyes on the questions and speak, but don't read the question and then say the answer, because otherwise this is not a presentation. The next point, use your personal experience or lie. Sorry to say the word lie, but I'm not going to be really sorry. Because, for example, even today in my class, like I asked in the writing, for example, there was a question about Muscat Festival, for example, in the email writing. And one of the questions was, did you have any difficulties during your trip? And simply the students answered the question, no, I didn't have any difficulties. Well, when we give you the question is to help you generate more ideas. Remember, the examiner is not looking at your story, and I don't care about your truth. I don't care about your story. I don't care actually as an examiner. Although I don't really care about what happens in your life. I'm here in the exam room and I'm looking at your language. And this is what I'm going to measure. So this is your chance to speak. If the idea is very simple, what I suggest is that you use your friend's experience, maybe your movie's experience, anybody's experience, just talk, because this is what I'm looking for. If you say, I don't know, or something like this, I'll be asking more questions, of course, in the next section, not in this section. But in this section, if you stop speaking before like the 2 or 3 minutes ends, then in this case, simply the section will end and we're going to move to the section 3 of the exam. Because of course, you know that the exam is 3 sections or 3 parts, part 1, 2, and 3. Now we're talking about part 2. So use your personal experience, or if you don't have a personal experience, lie. Remember, always, all the questions in this exam are not impossible. You can answer them. You cannot say, I don't know. You can use your creativity. Suppose that I ask you, for example, describe a zoo, and you've never been to a zoo. The question is, can't you describe a zoo? Can't you talk about animals? The answer is yes, you can. So you have to be creative. You can tell lies, and you can describe a zoo. Just make it up. Okay? So as in like you're 18, 19 years old, I think you can describe a zoo easily. Okay. Then expand. Use senses as it is a describe question. Expand your answer. For example, in the example of a museum, for example, it was the first question, when did you go, I think? So you don't say, for example, I went last week. Well, in this question, in this way, you're not going to get any more marks, okay? So you need to expand your answer and you need to speak full sentences. Don't just give that like just a word, okay? You need to speak full sentences. Expand your answer. Don't just give one sentence. For example, where was the museum, or where is the museum? You can say the museum is in the capital of Oman, or the largest city of Oman. It's in Muscat. That is the most important city in Oman. So, I mean, you can expand and you can add 2 or 3 sentences to your answer. Don't just give one sentence answer. Don't give, more importantly, don't give one word answer. Where is the museum? in Muscat? Who did you go with? My family. Don't do that. You're going to lose a lot of marks. Okay? Then organize your speech. You can use an introduction at the beginning. For example, it was very interesting, eventful trip, for example. You can use this at the beginning. Well, for example, describe a trip. Okay, I'll tell you now about my trip to Muscat. It was actually very interesting trip for like many reasons, whatever. Okay, there are I can remember three important things in the museum. One, two, three. So try to organize your speech when you are in the body. Okay, try to use an introduction. Try to use as well conclusion. For example, uh, you can say, this is why it is very memorable experience. To sum up, my trip to Oman was fantastic experience. I will never forget. So you can use the word to sum up, which means or which shows that you are summarizing something. Okay. You can use, and that's why at the end I like this place, or it's a very memorable event or experience to me, and that's why I will never forget this event in my life. It affected my life till now. I remember when I remember, etc. So you have to show some kind of conclusion, a sentence that concludes the whole event or the whole story or the whole description, the things that you're talking about. And the last one, this is of course in the organization, follow the order of the questions. Don't go to the number two. For example, some students might start with the easy questions and then they move to the difficult questions. No, try to follow the order of the questions. Uh, these are some important tips as well. Try to imagine the place or the thing or even the person that you're describing. Okay, so that will help you to talk more. Use introductory phrase, I want to talk about my trip. Use transitions first, then after that to make it more cohesion. Okay, so just to make, because we're going to check or you're going to be marked on this point. Speak loudly, especially now with the coronavirus. The exam is going to be like the distance between the examiner and uh, the test taker or the student is going to be like up to 2 meters. So please speak loudly. You cannot put down the mask. So you're gonna speak behind the mask, and it's like 2 meters. You need to speak loudly. Practice talking for 2 minutes at home before you go to the exam. So the main point at the end, or the last tip, practice, then practice, then practice before you go to the exam. So you could like at least reduce the anxiety or the stress in the exam. You could practice all what I've just said. Okay. So the key word or the key thing to do to pass this exam is to practice. Okay. So these are the things that you should do. Now we're moving to the things that you should not do. I put them under don'ts. Don't memorize the answer. And I think it's impossible to memorize all the answers of all questions, all the topics available on the internet. Don't try to memorize the answer. What's the other thing we can do? Practice, as I just told you. Next one, don't write too many words or full sentences on the paper. As I told you, the examiner is going to give you a paper and a pencil, and you have to write, and you could write some of some of the ideas. Don't write full sentences. It's only 2 minutes. You can just write words and only the main words that reminds you with the main idea. So don't write too many words, don't write full sentences. Then don't panic, because if you panic, you're not going to be fluent, you're not going to speak clearly, you're going to forget the ideas, you're going to, so just relax and try to do your best. If you're relaxed, you'll do better than worrying. Remember this idea well. Focus on one point at a time when you are speaking. So, for example, you put your finger on the first question, you're speaking about it. Don't worry about the conclusion or the introduction yet. You're coming to this point. Just talk about this point at a time. And then don't use boring words like good and bad. Some students like, but you talk to them, for example, why do you like sport? Because it's good. Why do you like this? Because it's good. Why don't you like this? Because it's bad. So as I told you, if you want to, for example, if you want to learn more adjectives, you can, for example, just go to the Google and write adjectives to describe personality or people, adjectives to describe personality, adjectives to describe items, books, films, okay? And you can learn these adjectives. It's very easy step. You can just do it. Don't give short answers, as I told you, or short answer for each question. You have to expand. I just told you that in the things that you need to do. Don't go off topic if you don't understand, and this is a very important point. Suppose you don't understand a question in the exam, don't ask to change the topic. Instead, you can just ask the examiner, teacher, please, can you explain this word? What's the meaning of this word? This is the only thing allowed to you. You cannot change the topic. You cannot ask about the general meaning of the question. You can only ask about the meaning of a word. So we've got here some common questions. Can I change the topic if I don't understand it? The answer is no. This is your question. Try to answer it. If you don't understand a word, you can just ask the examiner. But don't try to guess and go off topic. If you go off topic, you're gonna lose a lot of marks. What can I do if I don't have enough ideas about the topic? Try to think about the 5 W's. What, where, when, why, and which. If you think about these kinds of questions, you immediately, some ideas are going to start coming to your mind, and then bit by bit you will be able to speak. But remember the main, very important idea. The questions are not impossible to speak about. Don't get stuck. Think about your friend's experience, your experience, something you watch in the movie, anything. But remember, the questions are not impossible to speak about. Okay? I'm not asking you again to analyze, for example, what is inside this computer that is in front of me. You're not going to talk about this. If you say, I don't know if to describe what is inside the computer, well, I understand. But I'm not going to understand that you cannot speak or talk about or describe a zoo and you are like 19 or 18 years old. I think you should be able to describe it, even if you've never been to a zoo. So, yes, you can do it, but you need to practice and read more before you go to the exam. You cannot change the topic. If you don't understand any word, just ask the examiner and say, teacher, what's the meaning of this word? And the examiner is going to answer you. That's all for today. That's all for this part. Thank you very much and bye.